So today what I want to do is, we're working in chapter 3, and, well, actually a little bit at the end of chapter 2, and at chapter 3 on what's called sequential games. So I want to cover 3 topics today, and tomorrow we'll extend this idea of sequential games, and we'll be working on it again through the next week. So the first idea is to look at some notion of theory. Then we're going to introduce the idea of a game tree, which is another sort of piece of theory which helps you analyze and understand strategic interaction. It's actually a very useful concept for just getting a handle on important kind of strategic situations. Then I want to look at the notion of a strategy. Okay, so let's first have a look at a little acronym that we're going to use to help us think about theory. That's called PDIP. By the way, there's a handout sort of floating around on these game trees. Is there anybody who doesn't have one? You want to put your hand up there? You want to just pass that back up in that direction? Okay, guys, there's only, I think I made 120 or so. I'm not sure how many in the class. It's not hard to sketch them out in case you haven't got one, okay? So, if you remember when we played the stop-go game, it was like just 2 players. There's a strict order of play. The pie is kind of growing, and basically they have to figure out some way to divide the pie. And we observe various outcomes in that game. Now, in terms of trying to predict what's going to happen in that simple strategic interaction situation, it's useful to have a theory. Now, basically a theory runs something like this. It was sort of, well, if the players like more chocolate bars than less, and if they do things that are rational following their interests, and if they don't know one another, and so they're anonymously matched sort of often up, and if they can't communicate one another, then we would expect a certain pattern of play. You got that idea? So it's like, if da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then da-da-da-da-da-da. Right? So that a theory has that kind of logical structure. If we change the assumptions, so for example, what I did in that one of the stop-go games is I walked out of the room, right? And I gave the 2 players or 2 people who knew one another, okay, and I allowed them to communicate with one another. And so we got a different outcome. And so if we change the assumptions, then we would change what we would predict. Okay, so part of the theory, the idea is to have this sort of if-then structure, and you play around with the assumptions a little bit and try and figure out what difference it's going to make to your predictions. Okay, so that's really what a theory of games is all about. And for the first like 3 weeks in the course, we're going to start with fairly simple, stylized games. They'll typically be 2-player games. Each player will have 2 things that they can do. But the payoffs get kind of complex in the possible things that might matter to these players. Okay, so we can play around a little bit with changing the nature of the game and see what strategic insights we can get. See, guys? Okay? So, in first starting out with this theory, there's 2 parts. There's an idea of a structure of a game, which I use this acronym for called PDIP, and it's who are the players, what can they do, what information do they have, and what are their payoffs. Okay, so PDIP. Players, what can they do, what information do they have, and what are their payoffs. So, for example, when I'm trying to understand this political bargaining game going on about the high country land in New Zealand, I mean, it's been going on for 50 years, okay, so it's a long-term kind of thing, but I can sort of try and figure out who are the players in this, you know. Well, clearly there's the leaseholders, the people who hold the lease on this land, but they've actually been changing over the last 50 years. And clearly there's the managers of the government who are managing this land. And then there's the politicians who are kind of telling the managers what they should be doing and setting legislation stuff. And then there's us little taxpayers out here and people who like to use parks and things like that. And I'm thinking, okay, well, those seem to be the main players in the game. Okay? And then you go through and you say, well, what can they do? Okay? What actions can they take? You know, and under the conditions of the lease, you're supposed to get rid of all the rabbits on the land, okay? And so in the 50s, when they started this, trying to get the land sort of settled, I mean, the rabbits were terrible, absolutely terrible, all over the place in the Mackenzie country in Otago. And some farmers didn't do anything about the rabbits. And one of the reasons they didn't do anything is they were getting paid for the rabbit pelts. Okay, and they thought, well, let's farm the rabbits rather than the sheep. Okay, and then I don't know if you remember, I think it was mid-90s, early 90s, these guys decided to introduce a rabbit virus. You know, it's against the law to bring in this kind of illegal stuff into New Zealand. I mean, if you carry an apple in from Oz, you're getting $200 instant fine, right? If it's in your purse or something, or your pack, any kind of fruit, $200 instant. You don't even get a chance to defend. Well, these guys went off to Australia, brought some of this virus stuff back, whipped it up in their blenders at home, and put it out amongst the rabbits. Though not only was it against the law, but I mean they do stuff like that. Okay, so they can do lots of things. What about the taxpayers? What can we do? Nothing. You know, and then the politicians, what do they do? Nothing. But the managers are doing lots of things. So, for example, this afternoon I'm meeting with a guy from Alpine Recreations who's been a guide in Tekapo for the last 30 years, and I had a very interesting conversation with him. Matter of fact, two things that sort of popped up about what people do and don't do is there's a lot of these beautiful, what are they, tar and deer in the high country mountains that people like to hunt. And there are people in America and Europe who really like to hunt. Like they like it so much they're willing to pay $4,000 for a trophy animal. And of course you've got to have the accommodation with the wine, you've got to fly them in and all this kind of stuff. And so these high country pastoral farmers who have these deer and goats in that are trophy animals, they're making a lot of money off these hunters who want to come in. And ski fields. Where do the ski fields come from? Got to have a top of a mountain, right? You know, so I don't. Is the Tekapo ski field still going? The one at Round Hill? Anybody know? It is still going. Yeah. I mean, I haven't been there since the early '80s when my kids used to go there. It's a little beginner's field. It's kind of fun. It's really nice in the spring, snow and stuff like that. But that's about 2,000 hectares. Remember, I said a hectare is 2 football fields. So we're talking 4,000 rugby fields. And you guess what? Have to pay for rent. $150. 25 years. Okay? And the lease just got renewed for 25 years at the same prices in 1997. And I'm thinking, whoa, this is amazing. Who lets this happen? Okay? So, plus the Ann Brower sort of thing is the managers seem to be giving away all this freehold land on the lake shores of Wakatip and Pukaki and Tekapo, and wow, that is worth, you know, that lakeshore waterfront property, or even overlooking the mountains, is just worth its weight in gold, right? So that's what they do. And then, so what are the players? What can they do? Okay? And then what information do they have? Now, the idea of information in a game is often what information don't you have as well, okay? So, I mean, think of that. We use the term information, but you can almost think of ignorance. How the first few games we're going to look at, or the structure games, everybody's going to know everything they need to know to play the game. There won't be any uncertainty in the game, but it turns out uncertainty, what you don't know, is a big part of strategy. And there's lots of stuff that only we don't know in this game, and I'm just trying to figure out, you know. I'm figuring out because I'm sort of angry about the potential loss of this beautiful landscape and high country we have, and I'm even more angry that multi-millions of dollars are being given away to something like 300 people. You know, I don't mind that if they want a freehold land, give it back to the community, but giving it to 300 already wealthy people, that really bothers me. So, you got information, you know, and I don't know what's going on. I can't find out what's going on. There are certain things that, as a taxpayer, I don't know. There are certain things that the managers do know. There are certain things, you know, so each player knows something. And then the other idea is their payoffs. What do they get out of this, you know, or out of a situation of strategic interaction? So we're going to have today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about payoffs because it's quite a subtle and deep but important concept, okay, in game theory. Because remember, we're talking about mathematical models, but we're not doing mathematical. We're doing just logical models of the interrelationships between rational, intelligent people, okay, the interactions. So PDIPs. PDIP, what are the players, what can they do, what information, what payoffs. Now, anytime you're looking at an example of a strategic situation, just kind of keep that in mind. It's sort of saying, well, how could I think about this? Okay? Well, just kind of who's playing, what can they do, what's their information, what are their payoffs. Now, collectively, those ideas are known as the rules of the game. I mean, normally you think of a rule as a, you know, like in chess or cards or in a sporting contest, there's some normative thing that's written down and there's some penalties if you don't comply, and that's what the nature of the game is. Well, that counts as rules too, but for us it's like just the whole, you know, who's allowed to play this game? I would like to get involved in this high country game. I don't even know if I can play. You know, okay. So who are the players? That's part of the rules. You know what they can do. You know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. There are lots of legal and illegal things in this high country game, and there are lots of legal and illegal things in any other kind of game. This idea of what you can know or what you're allowed to know is like in card games. You know, you deal out some cards. I play a lot of competitive bridge, which is a really good game. It's quite fun. It's not as demanding as chess, which I don't think I could handle, but it's still, you got to have some skill, and there's some chance element. So you're sitting across the table, deck of cards is dealt out. You see your cards, but you don't see the other guy's cards. Okay. So I have information about my cards, but I don't have information about other people's cards. But I know who the players in the game are. There's only 4 of us. Okay, and so that's also kind of part of the structure of the game. And then the payoffs are part of the structure of the game. Like one of the questions we had when at the beginning of the course when I asked what was your view of game theory, somebody said, well, the winners and losers. Okay, well, you know, in card games it's there's sort of defined winner and a defined loser, or in any kind of sporting contest. Well, in situations of kind of social interaction, it's not clear that every time you have a winner you have to have a loser. You know? And maybe win-lose just isn't the right way to look. It's too binary, black and white. Okay, you've got to have more shades of meaning. What do people get out of the interactions that they have? Okay, so we want to payoffs are going to be part of the structure of a game, but those are just the if parts. Okay, if there are so many players, and if these are the things they can do, and if this is the information they have, and this is the payoffs, then we would expect such and such. And that's the next part is what we call the solution of a game. The idea of a solution came because it was really mathematicians who thought about game theory in the first place, and the way they set it up was they used mathematics as a language, and they had some equations, and they solved these equations, and that was their prediction about what would happen. Okay, so the idea of a solution is really a prediction and an analysis of the outcomes of a game. Okay, so just an acronym, PDIP, that's the kind of theory idea that we're going to take into every little game that we every little situation of strategic interaction we analyze. Now, these next questions, there's 6 questions here, which I don't want you to write down. You can pick them up off the web after. If you notice, I put the page reference in Dixit and Skeeth. This is in the 2nd edition, because on the exam, which is coming up at the end of this term, I will ask you, what are the 6 questions from Dixit and Skeeth? Okay, so I want you to be able to list those 6 questions and to give like a 1 or 2 sentence explanation of kind of why they're important. Okay? So that's just pointing this out. I mean, you don't have to write them down now. They'll be available on the web after. They're in the textbook. If you go through past exams, which are up on the website, every year you will see this same question asked. And I'm telling you now because this is 2/3 of you will get this. It'll be worth, say, 18, 20 points, and 2/3 of you can get free 18 points on the exam right now, okay, just by knowing those questions, being able to write 1 or 2 sensible explanations of what the key ideas in these questions are. But I guarantee you there's 1/3 of the class that won't do it, and I still don't understand why. Okay, let's play some rational interaction here, you know. Fountain is providing us with information. We have to pass a test. He's giving us part of the test right now. Now, normally people don't do that, but I want you to come out of this course remembering a few things. And so I'm going to kind of prompt you to remember the important things. And these 6 questions are kind of, just in themselves, they're very useful. Okay. So the first idea is the game simultaneous or sequential. Our stop-go game was called a sequential game. So, you know, the idea is there's an order of play. Some players can observe what other players can do before they have to make their choice. So that's the sequence. It's like somebody moves first, and then someone observes what they do, and then they can make their move seeing something else, okay? Now, a sequential game was like the color matching game, or if you're in an auction, you're bidding with other people, and it's not, it's a sealed bid kind of auction where you can't tell what other people are doing. So that turns out to be a fundamental issue in strategic interaction, is whether you can observe what other players are doing or not in the game before you have to make your choices, okay? Sequential and simultaneous. The second kind of idea is, are the interests and by the way, we'll use the term preferences, payoffs, interests, goals, purposes, all kind of to mean the same thing. The things that matter to people who are playing the game, and in conflict, okay? Or is there some room for cooperation? Like, when we played the stop go game, and the two women who were friends with one another, they were able to act cooperatively. They could say, well, let's try and get the whole 5 chocolate bars, and we'll just make an agreement with one another. And so they were able to achieve kind of a cooperative outcome. If you like, the pie is growing, and if we could only just wait until the end, we'd all get great. We could split it if we could split it. Or you can act a little more self-interestedly and end up, just with one of the players ending up with one at the beginning. Okay, and so the idea would be. There is room in that game for mutual benefit, okay? And that idea of mutual benefit means kind of like win-win, if you like, and if you want to think just win-lose ideas. But a better idea is mutual benefit. Now, mutual benefit is a kind of a subtle concept, okay? In the game that you play with the bookstore, you walk into the bookstore, you walk out, they phone the police, you go to jail. Not really. What happens is you walk into the bookstore, you pick up the book, and you walk to the cash register, and you pull out your credit card or your mom's credit card, or you put in some cash, and you get the book. Okay. Now, what do we say this book is $120 or something like that? Yeah, $120. That's a lot of money, right? That is a lot of money. $120. Now you're getting a book, and you're exchanging $120, right? So you've given up something. Like $120, that buys, that's a lot of money, right? It buys, 12 cases of beer? If that's your thing. You could go down you could go to 10 movies at Hoyt's, just if you pay the regular prices, but you could buy yourself lots of little tickets if you like movies. You're giving up a lot of stuff to get that book. On the other hand, you do buy the book, so getting the book is worth something to you. And the thing that you give up, we sort of say, okay, $120. Wouldn't it be great if it was only $50? Or if it was $10? If it was free, it'd be fantastic, right? Free textbooks. What if it was $200? Got to be in engineering or physics or something like that to be paying those kind of prices. But $200, a lot of money, right? You probably. I wouldn't buy the book. I'd be going to the library doing the photocopying. Sorry, guys, I like intellectual property right laws, but at $200, I can't afford it. Okay, and you probably couldn't either. So the idea with this game is that there's a degree of benefit you're going to take. The lower the price, the more benefit for you. Okay? But on the other hand, the lower the price, the less benefit for the bookstore. Because they get a profit out of it, something like that. So, but there is some opportunity for mutual gain, and how you divide up those mutual gain, and whether you can even achieve them is an important idea in game theory. Okay? Third question: is the game played once, a single-shot game, or repeatedly? Now. If you take the stop-go game and we're repeating it over and over and over, especially with the same players, they might sort of get the idea, look, we're just getting stuck here. One person getting a chocolate bar, let's do a tit-for-tat thing, okay? Maybe you're alternating back and forth who's red and go, and say, well, I'll play go all the way along, and you collect it, and the next game, a repeated game could have different kinds of strategic interaction, and it turns out it does, okay? With repeated games, you get what we call a theory of reputations. Okay? The strategic interaction between people, and you've got possibilities for future interaction, which, when you think about them, really make you a little bit concerned about what you're going to do now, okay? Because there might be repercussions in the future. So it's kind of like a sequential game, right? But even a sequential game just could be once, but if it's repeated several times or into the indefinite future, we have a different kind of strategic interaction. Is information or uncertainty unequal or equal? Remember I said, Pete, there's information, but you could almost think of it as ignorance. When we're playing cards, I deal out the cards, and you have your hand, and I have my hand. It's like we both, don't know what the other person's card's in, but our information is sort of, but what we don't know is the same, right? I don't know what cards you have, what cards I have, but we know they've been shuffled kind of randomly, and you've got a pile, and I've got a pile, right? On the other hand, I can see specifically the cards that I have. And again, that's called private information. Now, there are times where and it's information that you don't have. You're ignorant about what my private information is. So even in the card game, there's kind of some symmetry about what you don't know. Shuffling the cards is the same for all of us, creates the same kind of uncertainty. But once I pick up my hand, I know things you don't know. Okay. Now, I don't know if you want to listen on the web to this story I was telling about with the TAB sports betting guys. But I said they had this hit list where people who bet with them, who were on a particular list, as soon as those people place a bet, or they try to place a bet, the TAB guys are alerted, they decline the bet, and then they look at the odds they've sort of set and they move them back in the direction of wherever the rest of the market is in the world, because they know these guys have private information. Okay, so for example, you're betting on a horse race, okay, and you know that the horse has been drugged or it's been injured, but nobody else does. Okay, so you plonk down, it's a favorite, so you plonk down $30,000 and the horse not to win, on some other horse to win, and it's like, whoa. The TAB guys get quite nervous about that because they know you've done that before. They know that you somehow have some inside information, okay? And so in games, we want to distinguish between kind of games where the information or uncertainty is the same between people, like some card games where you're shuffling and everybody, it's 52 cards, assuming that everybody believes the deck isn't stacked, which is not necessarily a good thing to do, but it depends what kind of situation you're in, but assuming it's common knowledge, it's a regular deck of cards, then we'd say people don't know what's going to happen, but they're equally uncertain about what's going to happen. But not in some other games where there's private information, okay? I said, let me think of another example. Going to the bank. You guys take out student loans? Unfortunately, yes, right? You take out student loans. So have you taken a student loan? Are you going to default on your student loan? Nobody's going to default on their student loan. Well, I bet you some of you will, and it won't be because you're really bad people. And that's because I defaulted on my student loan from Canada, and I'm not a bad person. What had happened was I came in here in the mid-'70s, really long time ago. I had two small kids. My wife wasn't able to work as a nurse because, you have these rules against nurses from Canada working in nurses in New Zealand, and so we were really hard up for cash, and I couldn't pay it. I just couldn't pay it. So a year I'm not paying, then I get these nasty letters, like, I ignored the nasty letters, and 2 years went by, and I gave nastier letters, and I thought I'd better do something about this. So I wrote back and I said, look, I just cannot afford to pay. And there's quite a different income difference between Canada and New Zealand those days. And eventually I worked something out with them where I paid $25 a month, and it took me a long time, but I eventually got it paid off. Okay, so I knew that I'm kind of an honest guy, but there are people in the system, who are just going to dip out, and they're not going to pay. They're going to default. They know it, but the bank doesn't know it. And that's a bit of private information. It's a real problem when you're loaning people money, is whether they're going to pay you back, right? I mean, you might trust them, and game theory's got some really interesting insights about whether you should trust or not, okay? But so anyhow, this idea of people are uncertain, and one party knows something that the other party doesn't know, but the other guy knows that he doesn't know it, okay? And it's like, what kind of games? Sometimes you don't even want to play those games, like the TAB sports betting guys. Are the rules of the game fixed or manipulable? Now remember, the rules were who are the players, what can they do, what's the information they have, what are their payoffs. So the idea is you're playing one game, and then it's not going very well for you, so you might think, could I change the game in some way to make it better for me? Okay. Of course, the other player might be thinking exactly the same thing, and so you're both trying to, can I manipulate the rules in some way? Or you might even take like with this high country pastoral lease sort of thing. I mean, there's a current struggle that's going on, okay, for the wealth that's involved. But on the other hand, you want to sit back and you think, wait a second, don't we have a property system that somehow we should design so people can get mutual benefit out of having land, for parks and for homes and for farms and things like that? And so that's where a game theory can be very useful in the idea of, well, how can we tweak the rules to try to get these good things for everybody if they're not happening, okay? So are the rules of the game fixed or manipulable? If they're fixed, some things happen. If they're manipulable, then you might want to change the game, or the other player will in their favor. And then the last thing are agreements to cooperate and enforceable or not. Many of the games we'll see, there are opportunities for mutual benefit where people really can help one another. They can also harm one another, and it could be in their interest to harm one another. The harm can be, it's not harm like, I'm going to hit you. It's harm in the sense of look at the opportunities we had for good things. I'm not getting very many of those good things, okay? It's like the harm is in terms of reduced level of achieving your preferences or your payoffs or your interests. It's not necessarily a physical kind of harm, but it's harm to your interests. You get stuck, you know. I've been doing a lot of reading on the history of land sort of development, land rights and things like that, and they said in the old like gold mining fields that it was basically having a six-shooter. That's how you protect your property rights. You know, you put your little claim down, you got a gun, and everybody else has got a gun, and these guns go off, and people get into fights, they get drunk, and lots of crazy things happen because there wasn't a very good system of property rights. And you think, well, you know. If we could all just make an agreement, let's not have guns, okay? I mean, even if we have fistfights, at least nobody's going to get killed. Or maybe we should just put in some little boundaries around there and respect the boundaries, kind of thing. And so it's great that we have a more civilized society where we can have agreements that are enforced, okay? Rather than having by a third party, really, rather than ourselves. Anyhow, this last thing has to do with the enforceability of agreements. In games where agreements are enforceable by a third party, it's different than games where you haven't got somebody else who can enforce your agreements. Let's go back to the stop-go game, where the two women who I gave the chance to agree, how did they enforce their agreement? Well, probably because they're friends. Okay? And what would be is like if one of them reneged on the agreement and took all the chocolate bars, you know, it'd be like, friends don't do that sort of thing to one another. You know, it would kind of, I mean, let's face it, in that little trivial thing, it's not going to matter very much. But if we're talking $5 or $500, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and somebody runs off with something like that, it's, you know, I know, I can see why you did it, but that bothers me. I'm not going to be your friend anymore. You lose something in the future. Okay? So it turns out that the answer to the simultaneous one, number 3, or repeated game, is a way of often getting enforceability in the number 6. Okay, could you enforce agreements? You don't necessarily need a court and the police and stuff like that to do these things. There's lots of other ways you can have what we call self-enforcing agreements. So, see, those 6 questions cover a lot of interesting ideas. Now, yes. Yeah.
Because you got them to write it down, it would be.
Good question. What's your name? Megan. Okay, Megan's question was in the stop-go game. Remember, we had player A could move at round 1, round 3, and round 5. Well, at round 5, the decision didn't really matter too much. And the other player could move at round 2 and round 4, right? And what I did is I got each player to write down what they would do at each of the rounds. And then when I played the game, I said, well, you know, what would you like to, what did you do? And then I went over here and said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So they were, in some sense, they were bound to what they had written down. Now, on the other hand, it's a sequential kind of game. The way we think about it is one player moves first, they get to make their choice after. Now, I kind of forced you to make your choice according to that little strategy, right? And it turns out you can think of a sequential game as a simultaneous game with a big strategy, a long strategy. It tells you what you're going to do in all the circumstances you think yourself in. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, we'll see, actually, if we ever get to the end of the class, then we're going to try and meet that concept with a strategy idea that there are ways of representing sequential games as simultaneous games, and sometimes simultaneous games as sequential games. They can sort of be interrelated. And then in reality, things are often a little bit sequential, a little bit simultaneous. You know, as you're interacting with people, sometimes you can see what they do, and then you'll make a choice, and then as the game goes on, it'll be kind of simultaneous. You can't see what they do, and then you come back to a sequential sort of thing. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Now, those 6 questions are useful things to ask about if you start to think, and I mean think intelligently about these strategic situations of strategic interaction. So for, you know, like I'm bringing this high country accord pastoralist stuff because I'm interested in it. I think we should all be interested in it. But just take an ordinary personal relationship. Okay? We will go cross-gender from a guy to a girl or from a girl to a guy, okay? And, yeah, I mean, the first date I ever had was about grade 11, okay? Grade 11, I'll be about 16. I went to a high school dance. I mean, I really wanted to go with this girl. I just, you know, it's like, but I was pretty shy, pretty nervous, and I had no idea about dance. People said, well, if you ask her, she probably would say yes, you know, and You know, how many times I went to the phone? Well, it's really, when I look back, it's quite tender and quite amusing, because we had to walk about 2 miles to the school to do the dance, you know, and I got really dressed up, and she got dressed up, and we kind of walked over there, and we might have danced once, and we walked all the way back at 11 o'clock, and I never saw her again, you know. It's like, it's not that I didn't want to, but it just, you know, I don't know. Relationships are interesting. But if you start to ask about relationships, you know, you think, is it a simultaneous or sequential games? Do I have to make decisions without knowing what the other player's been doing? Or are they sequential ones where I can see what they've been doing, okay? Makes a big difference. Are interests in conflict or cooperation? You know, are you always fighting and tugging with one another? Is there some room for mutual benefit? Is it really a single shot kind of once-off date, or is it going to be a longer-term interaction? Makes a big difference, right, in how you behave. What about information? Well, that's a good one, isn't it? You know, I had my suit on. She had her dress on. I've never had a suit. Well, I shouldn't say I haven't had a suit since, but I did have a suit several times, and I'm sure that she had other dresses. But let's face it, the relationship game, there's a lot of imagery going back and forth, okay? A lot of signals and, you know, kind of stuff. So I don't know what the other person's really saying, doing, thinking, even though I think I might know it, and vice versa. Rules of the game, are there any rules of the game in relationships? There should be some, and there are some conventions and norms, because if you get them wrong, you really get stuffed around. And they're certainly manipulable, especially over a longer period. And what about agreements to cooperate? Are they enforceable or not? Well, I don't know. I came to New Zealand in '76. I was happily married, 2 small kids, and in 1983 I'm divorced. And I was a solo parent for the next 10 years. I never thought about it. I never planned it. And I'm sure there's 30-40% of the population who get themselves in that situation. They never plan it, you know. How can you enforce an agreement to trust and love somebody? And yet you make those agreements left, right, and center. Okay, so it's got to be sustained by something else than cooperation. So I mean, these questions are important for any kind of interaction you have with other people, students and teachers, managers and employees, shareholders and managers, whatever you name it. These 6 questions can start to make you ask some interesting questions. Okay. Okay, now let's have a look at a beginning of a game tree. Now this is, if you've read the chapter, this is going to be going a bit slow, but it's probably worth it. We're going to start off by looking at the structure of this simple game. We're going to have 2 players, and we're going to use colors. Okay, now in the course and in exams, it'll probably be really helpful for you to have a red pen and a black pen, or a red pen and a blue pen. Just 2 different colors, whatever. Because if everything's the same color, it's very hard to distinguish between the 2 players, what they can do and what their payoffs are. And then later on, what their... each player has 2 moves. In this game, it's going to be a sequential game where the red player moves first, the blue player moves second, and the red... Now, I've got here the red player has 2 strategies and the blue player has 4 strategies. We'll come back to that after we analyze the game, okay? What about the information? Well, this particular game is going to be a game of complete information in the sense that each of the players knows everything they need to know about how to figure out rational play in the game. Now, games of incomplete information where it's kind of like, what game am I playing? You know, this like the relationship sort of things. You're not really sure about some element of the game. You might not be sure what the other player's payoffs are. You might not know what the information that they have or they don't have. You might not be sure exactly what they can do or what they can't do, or what you can do or what you can't do for that matter. Maybe you might even be sure who's playing this game. Okay, so I mean, games of complete information, we're saying that they have all the information you need to be able to figure out what goes on. The incomplete information games are probably a little more interesting, but let's get started on easy ones. And then the other idea about perfect information is there's no uncertainty. Everybody knows everything precisely, okay? And the same. And then finally, payoffs. Well, let's have a look at the game again before we try to figure out how we're going to think about payoffs. Okay, so here we go. The game tree that you have on the handout is what I'm going to build up now. Okay, so I decided to hand it out to you in advance. You can kind of sketch it along, maybe work with the colors to get an idea, because there's a terminology that goes with describing a game tree. The first idea, remember that red player moves first, so we put a node for the red player, and we have a branch which describes what they can do. Okay, so it's the red player's move and we're putting it on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side because we're going to see the game is going to proceed from left to right. So going first, trying to put it over here to the left, red player, when it's a red node, the red player gets to choose, okay? And let's put some labels on the branches and the nodes. We'll put R for red, and these two, I and not I, what I'm going to think about is called an entry deterrence game. Again, we need a story to tell along with a game tree, okay? So distinguish between the story, which will be kind of, the English language, and how you analyze it through the game tree. So what we're going to think of here is kind of a contest between, let's say you're trying to decide whether to enter the race for being the mayor in Christchurch, okay, or any kind of political contest. Hillary Clinton's going to run for president. Who's the guy that did the global warming thing? Is he going to go back and be president? They've got to decide make a decision of whether they're going to enter a particular political race or not, and that's going to be the blue player. They're going to decide whether to enter or not. There's another player, if you think of the political race, who's kind of already the incumbent. Be Gary Moore here. Well, Bush, he's out, so there's no worry about that. But the incumbent player might decide to do something to try to prevent the other guy from getting into this race, okay? Now, let me take away from the political example. Let's think of telecom, okay? Telecom, pretty profitable business. Back in the 80s, when the post office, which post office used to be post office, bank, and telecommunications, when they were going to get broken up and privatized, they started spending money left, right, and center on fiber optic cables laid down by the railway because they knew that modern communications was going to be really profitable. And they thought if we put in lots of fiber optic cables all over the place, then new entrants who are coming in are going to be a little bit worried about us getting into a price war with them because we'll have lots of capacity to fight them off. Okay, so that's the incumbent. They're going to make an investment, just like in the political thing. You could sort of think, look, I'm going to have to invest heavily and run this guy down in the advertising campaign, find out all the dirt that I can about them. That's the way politics runs, right? And so that's going to be costly to me to do, but I'm going to make some investment. And that's the sort of thing we're thinking about here is the red player can make an investment or not invest. Okay, so just use two labels. Okay. Now, let's put in the blue player. If the blue player has a node, and we're putting the node over here to the right, let's put a label on it. The blue player can make a choice to enter or not enter after he observes what the red player has done, in this case, invest. Okay? But the blue player also has the same choice if he observes that the red player doesn't invest. So it's kind of like you're sitting there and, potentially you're coming into the telecommunications market in New Zealand, and you're watching what telecom's doing, and you can see they're laying down this massive investment, or you can see that they're not really doing any investing, okay? And you make your choice to enter or not enter. Or vice versa, the political situation, the blue player gets to observe, is the red player spending a lot of money on advertising, trying to build himself up and run me down, those investments, or are they not investing, okay? And so the idea is that those are two different situations, right, that you could find yourself in as a blue player, and you get to make a choice of either entering or not entering up here at B1, entering or not entering there at B2. Is that okay? So we're proceeding from left to right. And the way that we think of the game going sequentially is the red player moves first, makes a choice about investing or not investing. The blue player then decides to enter or not enter, depending on, and he gets a choice here, or he gets a choice there. And then there's some outcomes. The outcomes I put in a black box because really the outcomes are complex, There could be, you got profits or losses as telecom investing sort of stuff. There could be price wars. There could be advertising campaigns. People can get fired from their jobs. There could be layoffs. You both might make great profits. In the political game, there can all be slagging, all kind of back and forth. There might be future things that you're kind of worried about. All kinds of things in the black box. Okay, but the importance of the black box is we call it a terminal node. The game ends. Okay? Now that's another important thing when you think of real life games is they often kind of seem to keep going. In theory, we're going to say, oh, there is an end. Okay. So what we've got here is red player invests, Blue player enters. The red player invests. The blue player doesn't enter. The red player doesn't invest. The blue player enters. The red player doesn't invest. The blue player doesn't enter. Now, if you follow that path along, and we call it a path of play, you can sort of think of it as a history of the game. Then we get to the outcomes over here in the black box, and the outcomes could be a little different than the path of play, but those are the things that matter to people. Okay. So, for example, what we might want to think of is, from the red player's standpoint, what's the best? From the red player's standpoint, what's the worst? From the blue player's standpoint, what's the best? From the blue player's standpoint, what's the worst? Now, so what I've done is I've put some numbers up here as payoffs. Now, before we kind of get into the detail of what these numbers mean, just they are numbers, okay? And the numbers are differently colored. The idea for the blue numbers is that they represent, and I mean represent, and I'll say it again, I mean represent. They aren't the payoffs, but they sort of tell us something about how the blue player feels about this game. Now, what is the game? Well, if higher numbers are better, the highest number for the blue player is right here. Okay? So the best outcome for him would be, if the red, and path of play would be, if the red player doesn't invest, he gets to enter, and then let's say that then the political contest goes on. He might win or lose, but this is a good situation for them. Or the new entrant in the industry for telecom. It's better if telecom does invest. I enter. We do our little price games and stuff like that. But at least he hasn't invested all this money and capacity. That's my best outcome. Okay. What about the worst outcome for the blue player? Well, the worst outcome is that if he invests and I enter and we enter this big price war, that's bad. Okay. So the one is like a label. Good. 4 is like a label, sorry, 1 is like a label bad or worst. 4 is like a label good or best. And the 3 and the 2 are kind of in between but ranked. So what we're going to do when we're thinking of people's payoffs in these first few games we look at is think of them as a preference rank. Okay? So that any player can rank any path of play or any history or any outcomes and say, this is better than that. Okay? And the numbers will indicate for us what's going on in the game. So in this particular game, what we have is the blue player likes this particular path of play, not invest for red, he enters, and that's his best outcome. The worst outcome is if the other guy invests and he enters, then they're going to get in this price war. And the not so bad outcome is if he invests and I don't enter, because if he invests and slags me off and I get into this race, that's going to be really bad. But if I just don't even engage with him, that's pretty good. Okay, it's not as good as the best, but it's not bad, and it's certainly better than not entering and not having tried at all, which is second worst. Okay, so that's the story you tell. Notice what I did is I took those numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I talked about them. Okay, I'm talking in terms of language. It says best, worst, kind of in between, not the top, but pretty close. Better, and so we get this idea of a rank ordering of preferences for the blue player. Let's look at it for the red player. The numbers indicate the rank order of preference. Again, start off by thinking what's best and what's worst. The best for the red player is if he doesn't have to invest and the other guy doesn't come in and contest either his market or the political race. Okay, so 4 is the best for the red player. What's worst? Well, if he invests and the other guy enters into this price war, that's bad. Okay. What about intermediate cases? Well, intermediate cases are if I invest and the other guy doesn't enter, at least I stopped him from entering. It's not as good as if he doesn't enter at all and I don't spend the money investing, but it's not bad, okay? And second worst is, or whatever, is that if I don't invest and he does enter, I don't do anything about it, then that's not as good as investing and him not entering. Though it's even much worse than me not investing and him not entering. Oh, sir, that's right, yeah. I think I got that right. Okay, the idea is that the numbers are telling us something about the relative preference ranks of the players in the game. So when we're going to think about payoffs, the concept is preference. The way to represent the concept is numbers. Whenever you see payoffs in a game, you must try to think for yourself, what do the numbers represent? When we played our stop-go game, I'm handing out these chocolate bars, and I was trying to get people to act as if they wanted more chocolate bars than less. But some people didn't want chocolate bars. Okay? So even though I knew what the outcomes were in chocolate bars, I know those numbers, I didn't really know what the players preferred or not. Okay? Whether they really wanted 5 chocolate bars or they just didn't care. Right? So it's important to be able to know, in our games, these games of complete information, we're going to have the players know the payoffs in the game. Okay. What have I got here? Let me get rid of this. So let's just kind of summarize what we got to. We got a history or paths of play going through the game from left to right. The outcomes are in the black boxes. And the payoffs are the preference ranks. Okay, now let's analyze the game. Let's take the game here. Now I put a little box on the top. Because in this game, it turns out to analyze the game, what you want to do is you want to think of it from the standpoint of each player. Okay, so I am the red player. Say I'm at the beginning. I'm going to invest or not invest. At the time that I invest, I can't tell what the blue player is going to do. They're either going to enter or not enter. Okay? If I don't invest, they're either going to enter or not. I can't tell, but I can think about it. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and think about it, and I'm thinking about it, and I think, oh, I would really like it if they would not enter because 3 is better for me. Got that idea? I would really like it because 3 is better for me. I'd much prefer they didn't enter than they entered. I'd much prefer that. I'd much prefer that. So mantra goes on. I much prefer it. I much prefer it. That isn't the way you analyze a game. Because in this game, you don't get to choose whether to enter or not enter. The other guy gets to choose that. Of course, if he enters, it's bad for you. And if he doesn't enter, it's better for you. But you don't get to choose it. So you want to think about this little portion of the game from the blue player's standpoint. And from the blue player's standpoint, 3 is better than 1. 3 is better than 1 for him, and 3 is better than 1 for me. In that little decision, we're in perfect agreement. Couldn't be better, right? My preference rank is 3. I'm a red player. Your preference rank is 3. You're a blue player. For you not entering, and if you do enter, it's worse for you, and it's worse for me. We're in complete agreement in our preferences. Okay. So that's, there's no conflict between us. So what we're going to do, by focusing in on this payoffs for the blue player, not the red players, even though that's what you want as the red player, then the blue player's looking at this, the blue player wants a 3 more than 1, so they're not going to enter. And what we're going to do is prune that branch. So we use the term prune, just put some lines through that branch and say, the line means we don't expect the blue player to enter. Why? Because he's got a better course of action for himself or herself. We'll keep the blue player as a male and the red player as a female. Okay? But by not entering, he gets a better outcome for himself. Now notice when I said we, the red player, the blue player, and you who are analyzing the game would all figure out the same thing. Okay? The intelligent thing to do, if these are the payoffs, is if the blue player does get a choice here after the red player invests, is for him not to enter so we can prune off that branch. Let's keep going here. Just try one more. Okay, let's look at, we put our pruning there. Let's look at the blue player's choice out here. If we look at the blue player's choice there, and I'm the red player, and I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, oh, 4 is better than 2, 4 is better than 2. I really want him to not enter. I really want him to not enter. It's not going to work, okay? Because when the blue player thinks about it, 4 is better than 2. Not entering is not as good as entering. So if you don't invest, the blue player's best thing that he can do in that situation is choose to enter because he gets a more preferred outcome 4 than his second, the number 2 preferred outcome. Okay, so entering is better. Now that's not good for the red player. Okay, the red player would really like it if he didn't enter, but we have to expect that he's going to enter. We have to expect that. The red player has to expect it. The blue player has to expect it. With me? Okay? Now this is called what we call look forward and reason back. We didn't start at the beginning of the game to figure it out. We started at the end of the game and put these little boxes kind of around the end nodes to figure out what's going to happen there. So then let's take this situation here. We've pruned this branch. We don't expect the blue player to enter if he gets to node B1. We don't expect the blue player to not enter if he gets to B2. That is, what we expect is he will enter at B2 and not enter at B1. And so from the red player's standpoint, when he's thinking about it, he should be thinking, well, anything could happen in this game. You know, I could go here, this guy could go there and there. Anything could happen, But the rational thing to predict would happen would be that if I invest, the other guy's going to not enter, I'm going to get a 3. And if I don't invest, the other guy's going to enter, and I'm going to get a 2. So the best thing for me to do, I prefer things that have numbers 3 in them because they're my more preferred outcomes than a 2. So I would prefer to invest rather than not invest. Okay? And so we would prove netted branch there, and we would say, we would predict the outcome of this strategic interaction would be for the red player to invest and for the blue player to not enter, and they both get their, not their top outcome, but their second top outcome. Neither one of them gets their best outcome, but neither one of them gets their worst outcome either. Okay, that's the way you can sort of read and interpret the outcome of the game. But this idea, I just put in some labels here, is that this is called a rollback equilibrium. And the rollback works like this. We start at the end and we work backwards. Okay? We don't try to figure out what's the red player going to do. Well, we do, but we need to start with what the blue player is going to do because the blue player is at the end of the game. Okay? And what we worked out is that we would expect this to be the path of play, this to be the outcome, and this is the outcome in terms of payoffs. And we call those rollback path of play and rollback payoffs. Okay, now we'll stop there for now, and tomorrow we're going to come back and kind of reanalyze this, have a little bit deeper look at this game. But this is the way you use the theory in a very simple structured situation to come up with a prediction about what you think would happen. Okay, see you tomorrow.